Hi guys, I'm Michael Johnson with Shockwave Defense. We had the privilege of bringing out Nigel February out here to Albuquerque, New Mexico to Shockwave to train a course. Now, I've had the privilege of training martial arts since I was 2.5 years old. My dad is one of the original students of Bruce Lee, lived and trained at his house off and on from '67. My grandfather actually started us in the martial arts back in the 20s. Samuel Johnson had a black belt in jiu-jitsu and judo. And my dad had multiple black belts in his systems until he met Bruce Lee. And it kind of, I think, started a trend. Like many martial artists, we got into the concept of like this one-for-one mindset of like, oh, I do this, you'll do this, and back and forth. And my dad met Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee beat the hell out of him. So that really shifted his whole perspective on how to perceive the martial arts and how to perceive the training of martial arts. So he wanted to become more of a truth seeker, I believe, after that. And obviously that's something that I also took on through my martial arts training, wanting to know what was the best way to beat anybody who had bad intentions. I didn't want stuff that looked flashy. I didn't want stuff that looked pretty. I wanted things that were going to work when the bad guy didn't care how good of a martial artist I was on paper. I wanted him to, oh yeah, you got all that? That's great. I don't care. I'm still going to kill you. And I wanted it to be effective. So I started training in the martial arts, studying everything I could that was amazing. And this last year, I got to go to South Africa and train under Nigel February while I was out there. I got the privilege to train a tactical response team and do a shark dive and see some penguins, but that's besides the point. But we had
that's besides the point, yeah.
Had a lot of time when we were out there. The system, the approach was interesting to me, but I needed to go to South Africa to understand why the system was as violent as it was. That being said, went out there, did the training, and what I found was something that was not a knife system, but a stabbing art. Because when you understand stabbing, you understand counter-stabbing. When you understand stabbing, you have to understand anatomy and physiology. When you understand stabbing, you have to understand simplicity of how to use a blade. We brought Nigel out from South Africa to do a seminar here at Shockwave Defense. Today, we had probably 50, 60 individuals here from the 512 Rescue Squadron, local law enforcement agencies, both from sheriffs and police. And it was absolutely amazing. We had a great group of people, trained them a lot of skills, and brought them up to speed on something so that they can identify it and utilize it against an attacker, whether it be an active shooter scenario, whether it be something if they get caught behind enemy lines, etc. Amazing day. So, Nigel, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I started martial arts when I was 16 years old. A little bit about my dad. He was a professional musician in the 60s and 70s. And his dad was a butcher by trade. Also, he was also Native American, so, you know, the whole knife thing seems to filter down through the family. But obviously, you know, I couldn't really tell the difference. Anyway, so I started with Taekwondo and some Aikido in the 90s. A lot of the kicking arts, kickboxing. And then I started Silat, Malaysian Silat. And I always wondered why none of the martial arts that I was practicing could, it didn't seem to reflect or have any effect against the way the criminals moved on the Cape Flats. And I was wondering, the way that they present the blade in the dojos just didn't look like the knife attack on the streets. And, of course...
Because it wasn't.
Yeah. I didn't know what the difference was. But again, this was by accident. I was doing, I was training in Silat one day, and I was seeing them doing some of these forms, these postures. And then it struck me that I saw something similar, and that the way the criminals moved looked a lot like Silat. I started researching and then discovered that, the Malaysians have been in South Africa since the 1500s. So obviously they should have brought what looked like Silat with them. Not openly taught, so it was an assumption. But everything that the gangsters were doing looked a lot like the Silat, obviously mixed in with some Nguni stick fighting. But the year my father died is when Piper actually was completed. So, that private research was then made public.
How'd you get your research?
Well, I trained with various criminals on the Cape Flats, gangsters, especially numbers gangsters. Again, these were friends and family members of colleagues of mine or friends of mine or family of mine. So you used to find them, if they weren't in jail, they would be out on parole and, visiting family, see them at family functions. And again, at that point, I was already training extensively in just, normal martial arts.
I think this is a hard part for people to understand. A lot of times they sit down and they go, I only want to train under a guy who has a clean record, has only been around the greatest of people. And the problem with that mentality is that you don't get the pure version of somebody who's testing it in real time. It doesn't mean that you're a criminal by studying that. It just means simply that you had to learn how to adapt what was going on and extract what was good and disregard what's not. And that's kind of what Bruce Lee talked about, right? Take the good, get rid of what's not good, hack away the unessentials, keep what's necessary.
If you look at how technology has progressed in the last 10 years, whatever was good 10 years ago has all but, being defunct. So technology and science and all those things have moved on. With the martial arts, and especially violence, criminals innovate a lot faster than martial artists do. So I've always said that martial arts is a historical view of outdated combat.
So the systems that haven't evolved have kind of become the same purist mindset, or they've become so inundated with a bunch of fancy stuff that it makes it hard. Or what I've also seen in today's martial arts is they're very specific to one topic, and it's not a full spectrum look. Yeah. Right? One of the things that attracted me to Piper is that you can use it in ground fighting, you can use it in boxing, you can use it in close quarter combat. Whereas if I were to sit down and study something like, like I've studied jiu-jitsu, great art, right? Great to learn how to do things on the ground, but as soon as a weapon gets implemented or there's more than one opponent, you have a problem, right? So it's a tool inside your tool belt, but it's not the end-all be-all. Yeah. You got to be very careful.
Well, if the two of us are having a fist fight, the guy that's the toughest will absorb most of the blows and still beat me. In other words, fatigue will probably stop me from beating you, but for the most part, I will have the odd bloody nose or not, right? With a knife, that the first time you make contact with the human body, you're going to start bleeding whilst you're under adrenaline and all of that. So you would die purely because after the first stab, and again, it's lethal. It's lethal immediately. Even if I stab you in an area that is away from the organs and you don't get treated, you will bleed to death.
There's only 3 primary targets, because that's really what you're remembering when you're under stress and under duress. And there's only a handful of movements inside of here. Why are there so few moves? Why aren't there hundreds of moves like you see in a lot of systems?
Well, look, if you're going to kill something, okay, your skill set has to be different. You are a predator hunting. You're not fighting for mating rights. 2 males squaring off, that's a fight. That's a duel, right? It started at the same time. There's rules of engagement. With Piper, any killing system will be hunter and prey. That is how that works. If you know where the organs are, as long as the organs don't move around, those 3 things will get you the same results.
And that makes it simple, it makes it durable, makes it reliable, and it makes it consistent. What is it about that concept of me studying it doesn't make me a bad person?
First thing that people have to remember is chances are that thing can hunt you back. So if you don't understand what a bear is like, know when it hibernates, know when it feeds, know when it mates, know exactly when it will go for water. And if it's injured, how desperate will that animal be?
Is it territorial? Is it not territorial? Is it territorial?
So you have to get inside the head of a bear like a biologist, right? And that's all I'm doing. I'm a martial artist, right? If you look at the arts that I've studied. Mm-hmm. So imagine how hard it was for me in terms of my ego to find out that everything that I've done was actually useless. And because I still love doing the martial arts because it's good for the mind, right. It's good for the body. So the whole mind, body, spirit, keeping healthy was important to me. Right. And then to find out that I've dedicated 30 years of my life and discover that these guys would come in
Doesn't
and just...
work.
Yeah, So for me to find that out, I mean, people had issues about, their egos, being bruised. Imagine how it was for me, because I'm still not that guy. I was like, because I, like I said, all the kicking arts I love, the taekwondos and the capoeira. I spent a lot of time training.
But it's also a story that we're told, right? Like you get into this mindset, and it sounds like blasphemy coming from a JKD guy, but there's guys that go, Bruce Lee wouldn't do that. How do you know? Bruce Lee didn't do that now, or he didn't do that in the 60s, but had he been alive, he was always evolving.
People think, I evolved Piper over the last 21 years. It's like, no, it was difficult for me because I still wanted to do, work out and have the cool martial arts. Why? Because it made me feel good. And people always want to get, and they want to win inside of training. They want to get something right. The idea is to lose in training all the time so that you have 1,000 different possibilities how this could have ended.
Encounters.
Encounters. So in Piper's so evolved that it will keep beating you, and that will just make you better. You won't beat it, but you will just get better all the time. I've got a question for you as well. When I looked you up, so when I looked you up online, I was also seeing some, I saw how skilled you were in JKD's. Your father was one of Bruce Lee's students, but people were hating against you.
Yeah.
And they were tearing you down, and I'm like, but we've been Facebook friends for a long time, and I didn't see any other interaction, but it came from a specific section of the community. Like what was that about?
Yeah, well, it's funny because there's a couple of things that you have to face when you are a person who's a pioneer, right? When you're not just following what everybody else is doing and you step out of that line, you've all of a sudden become a visionary. And once you become a visionary and you step out of that line and you're on this side versus in the mainstream, people start looking. And the people that are in control over here, they want everybody to stay in that same boat, right? Because it gives them this level of authority. And martial artists are very interesting creatures. Like a lot of them are demigods in their minds. Yeah. They want to be worshipped by students. They're like, oh, there is only Shotokan, because as long as there's only Shotokan, all my students worship me. And so as soon as a guy like me or you, because I noticed the same thing about you, just because you broke out of the mainstream, all of a sudden everybody wants to demonize you, right? Yeah. And then they're afraid, right? Because you for whatever reason, you aren't so insecure that you got to stay with the mainstream that you come over here. Now let's take a more popular guy. Who else did they do this to? Bruce Lee, right? As soon as Bruce Lee looked at all the systems and he said, you know what, man, you guys, you look pretty, but you suck, right? He didn't say it in so many words, but he's like, yeah, you want to go? We'll go. You guys are talking because you get these guys that go, oh, if I did my Tai Chi like this and then you did your thing like, and Bruce was like, dude, shut up. Let's just fight. Let's do it. And that intimidates the world of martial arts for some reason. A lot of martial artists, they want to keep you in a box. And a lot of people want to keep you in a box. Not just martial arts, I think it's human behavior. So anytime you deviate away and you go, I'm challenging the status quo, and I'm going to come over here and do something else, then you're going to have that concept of leadership, because some people are going to follow you. Some people aren't going to follow you. Leaders always have two things, followers and enemies. Right? And so when they come over here, they got people that are like, yeah, no, this makes sense. And then this other guy's like losing his worship, and the people are splitting off and they're coming over here, and it starts becoming a huge threat to the status quo, right? The mixed martial arts is probably one of the best things and worst things that happen in martial arts, right? Because one of the things it did is it took the effectiveness of skills and it said, look, a guy that hasn't trained for a long time can be effective just by wanting to go out and fight, because you learn so much through research and development, right? What it did bad for martial arts is it took away the traditionalism in understanding the discipline and the emotional discipline and the internal dialogue and the behavior and the honor and loyalty and everything that came along with the traditional martial arts. Those were great things. Yeah. But what it did that was good is it took all of these guys that were like, oh, you cannot hit me. I am master sensei, Feng Shao, wow, whatever it is. And it started taking these guys and pressure testing them and making all these, like you see these guys that go, I can knock you down my energy. And then a guy comes up and just blasts them in the face. We're like, oh, apparently that's not effective. One final thing that you'd like to share with the viewers about Piper, and that you'd like to share with them in understanding the significance of its effectiveness and how law enforcement can use it as an early detection system, how military can use it as a means of escape and evasion from legal restraint in case they get caught behind enemy lines. What are your perspectives on that?
Something like Piper would have already existed somewhere else in the world, because criminals innovate, right? With the amount of things available on the internet, somebody could copy any knife system, and that would become a problem for policemen in any part of the world. So learning Piper would give them the closest thing to studying a predator inside a cage. They could poke and prod and actually see exactly how to run simulations, because up until now we've never had a live bad guy simulator that you could actually test and say, okay, my knife defenses don't work, but I'm not dead. So that's the one cool thing as to where Piper will go. And again, the more people that study it, the more people will understand what it's like to be inside a criminal's head, what he thinks when he's attacking you.
So that they can use it to counter that behavior.
Yes, and it's a physical thing. It's not a study of criminal notes. It's not something you could read out of a book.
It's a criminal mind.
It's a criminal mind. So you physically have to do all the movements to see how devious it is, and then realize, okay, I have to take this a little bit more serious when somebody does come for me, when somebody does approach me and produce a knife or whatever. So I think the effectiveness of the blade and I would say the fear. I'm not saying people should be scared, but I'm saying that the more you start seeing that, that fear levels will start to drop because you're not anxious anymore. It's not an unknown.
You're also not walking around ignorant.
Yeah.
You know, you can't be an ostrich, just stick your head in a hole. The danger's still there. So the more we can identify it, just like that rear naked choke,
Yeah.
the better we can counter it.
Yeah, it was scary before, but the more people who did it, the more difficult it would be to catch me with, you know, any pipe or move.
Right. Well, Nigel, it's been a pleasure having you here. My guys love you. The students loved you. We got another seminar tomorrow. I know you're exhausted. I'm exhausted. So we're going to wrap this up, but it's been a pleasure having you, and thank you for coming down to Shockwave Defense. You're always welcome here, and you're always welcome in my home.